It's all right, you're gonna be okay. Wait. Easy there. We'll find our way.
The wind was screaming at 80 miles per hour, and the temperature had dropped well below zero. Everyone else was inside, safe and warm. But 10-year-old Leo was out in the whiteout, desperately digging through the snow. He wasn't looking for a toy, he was fighting to keep a heartbeat alive. This is the incredible true story of a boy who refused to let a wild horse die. The morning started with a sky so blue it looked like painted glass. In the high plains, the air usually felt thin and crisp, but today it felt heavy. Leo stood on the back porch of his family ranch, watching the horizon. He was only 10 years old, but he knew how to read the land. He watched a line of gray clouds crawling over the distant mountains. They looked like giant, bruised fingers reaching for the valley. To most people, the ranch was just a quiet place with a lot of grass. To Leo, it was a kingdom. His favorite part of this kingdom lived beyond the wooden fences. A herd of wild horses roamed the public lands near their property. There were about 20 of them, led by a massive black stallion with a scarred face. Leo called him Midnight. Leo spent every afternoon sitting on the top rail of the corral. He never tried to get close. He just watched. He loved the way their hooves sounded like rolling thunder against the dry earth. He loved the way they looked out for each other. If a young foal wandered too far, an older mare would gently nudge it back to the group. "Leo, get inside and help your father with the wood," his mother called from the kitchen window. Her voice sounded tight. She was usually calm, but today she was moving fast. Inside the house, the radio was buzzing with static. A man's voice came through the speakers, sounding urgent. He talked about a cold front coming down from the north. He called it a monster storm. He said the temperatures would drop 40 degrees in just 1 hour. He told everyone to stay off the roads and bring their animals into the barns. Leo's father was stacking heavy logs next to the fireplace. His face was covered in sweat despite the cooling air. "It is going to be a bad one, son," his father said. "The wind is going to scream tonight. We have to make sure our horses are locked up tight. Once the whiteout starts, you cannot see your own boots in front of your face." Leo helped his father carry the last of the wood. His mind was not on the chores. He was thinking about the wild herd. They did not have a warm barn. They did not have piles of golden hay or buckets of clean water. They only had the open range and the thin shelter of the pine trees. He looked out the window one last time. The sun was disappearing behind the gray wall of clouds. The temperature was already falling. He saw the wild horses moving toward the deep ravine. They were walking in a single line, trying to find a place to hide from the wind. Among them, a small buckskin colt struggled to keep up. The little horse was shaky on its legs. "They will be okay, right, Dad?" Leo asked softly. His father sighed and put a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Nature is tough, Leo. Some make it and some do not. That is just the way of the world. We have to worry about our own right now. Get the latch on the door. The wind is starting." As the first flake of snow hit the glass, Leo felt a knot in his chest. He knew the storm was coming for the little horse. The wind hit the house like a physical blow. It did not start as a breeze. It started as a roar that made the wooden walls groan and the windows rattle in their frames. Within minutes, the beautiful blue sky was gone. In its place was a thick, blinding wall of white. Leo stood by the kitchen window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. He could not see the barn anymore. He could not even see the porch steps. "Stay away from the glass, Leo," his mother warned. She was lighting candles as the power flickered and then died. The only light left came from the orange glow of the fireplace. Leo's heart was hammering against his ribs. He kept thinking about that small buckskin colt. The herd had been moving toward the deep ravine, but the snow was falling so fast it would fill that ditch like a trap. In a storm this big, a small animal could be buried in minutes. He imagined the colt shivering, its thin legs sinking into the drifts while the older horses ran for their lives. "The wind is hitting 80 miles an hour, his father said, looking at a battery-operated weather radio. "Nobody goes outside. Not for any reason. If you get lost in this, you will not find your way back. You would freeze before you reached the fence." Leo nodded, but his eyes stayed on the white darkness outside. He felt a strange pull in his chest. It was a heavy feeling, like a rope tying him to that wild horse. He knew his father was right about the danger. He was only 10 years old and small for his age. But he also knew that if he sat by the fire and did nothing, that horse would be dead by morning. He watched his parents walk into the kitchen to check the pantry supplies. This was his only chance. He crept toward the mudroom, his heart loud in his ears. He pulled on his heavy wool socks and his insulated boots. He tucked his pants into the boots and tied the laces tight. He grabbed his thickest coat, a pair of leather gloves, and a wool hat that covered his ears. He felt a rush of cold air as he cracked the back door open. The wind tried to push him back into the house. It felt like a giant hand pressing against his chest. He stepped out and closed the door softly behind him. The cold was unlike anything he had ever felt. It took his breath away instantly. The air was full of ice crystals that stung his cheeks like tiny needles. He could not see the ground. He could only feel the snow piling up against his shins. "I have to reach the fence," he whispered to himself, though the wind swallowed his words. He reached out and found the icy wood of the porch railing. He followed it down the steps. Every step was a battle. The snow was already deep, and the wind tried to knock him off his feet. He reached the main fence line that led toward the back pasture. This was his lifeline. If he let go of this fence, he would be lost in the whiteout forever. He began to shuffle forward, his hand sliding along the frozen wire. He was heading toward the ravine where he had last seen the colt. The world was nothing but screaming wind and white shadows. He was terrified, but every time he thought about turning back, he pictured the colt's large, dark eyes. He kept moving, one difficult step at a time, into the heart of the monster storm. The fence was the only thing keeping Leo in this world. The wood was slick with a layer of frozen rain, and the wire stung his palms even through his thick leather gloves. He kept his head down, chin tucked into his chest, trying to shield his face from the biting wind. The snow was no longer falling in soft flakes. It was a solid wall of white powder that swirled in circles, making it impossible to tell where the sky ended and the ground began. Every few steps, a massive gust of wind would slam into him. It felt like being pushed by a giant. Leo would stumble, his boots sinking deep into a new snowdrift, and he would have to squeeze the fence wire until his knuckles ached. He knew that if he let go, the wind would spin him around. In a whiteout, you lose your sense of direction in seconds. You can walk in a circle until you drop from exhaustion, never knowing you were only 10 feet from your own front door. "Just a little further," he whispered. His voice was a tiny sound against the roar of the blizzard. "Just to the big rock." He reached the corner where the ranch fence met the open range. This was the most dangerous part. To reach the ravine, he had to leave the safety of the fence and walk across 50 yards of open pasture. He looked back, but the house was completely gone. There was no light, no shape, and no path. There was only the screaming wind. Leo took a deep breath of the freezing air. It felt like swallowing needles. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a long piece of bright yellow nylon rope he had grabbed from the mudroom. He tied one end to the sturdy corner post of the fence. He tied the other end around his waist. It was his only way back. He stepped away from the post. Immediately, the wind tried to trip him. The snow here was waist-high in some places and swept bone-dry in others. He moved like a slow-motion diver, lifting his knees high and leaning his weight forward. He could feel the rope tugging at his waist, letting him know how far he had gone. 30 feet. 40 feet. The rope went slack, then tight again. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath his boots. Leo let out a yelp as he slid down a steep embankment. He tumbled through the soft powder, his arms flailing, until he hit the bottom of the ravine with a thud. He was buried in a drift, his mouth and eyes filled with cold grit. He scrambled to sit up, spitting out snow and wiping his goggles. He was at the bottom of the ditch. The wind was a bit quieter here, muffled by the high banks of the ravine, but the snow was much deeper. It was piling up like sand in a desert. "Hey!" Leo shouted. "Are you here?" Nothing but the whistle of the storm answered him. He began to wade through the deep drifts, his legs feeling heavy like lead. He was shivering so hard his teeth were clicking together. He felt a wave of fear. Maybe the horse was already gone. Maybe it had been buried hours ago. Then he saw it. A small, dark shape was poking out of a massive drift near a cluster of frozen bushes. It looked like a branch at first, but then it moved. It was an ear. Leo lunged forward, falling onto his knees. He began to dig with his hands, throwing chunks of packed snow behind him. He reached something warm and furry. It was the buckskin colt. The poor animal was buried up to its neck. Its head was resting on the snow, its eyes half closed and clouded with ice. Its breath was coming in short, ragged gasps that turned into tiny puffs of steam. "I found you," Leo sobbed, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm here. Don't go to sleep. You have to stay awake." The horse let out a very low, weak whinny. It didn't have the strength to kick or struggle. It was giving up. The cold was winning. Leo knew he couldn't lift a horse, and he couldn't carry it back. He had to make the horse want to live. He reached out and began to rub the horse's neck with all his might, trying to bring the blood back to the surface. He felt the animal's heart beating, slow and faint, but it was still there. "You're a wild horse," Leo urged, his face inches from the colt's frozen ear. "You're Midnight's kin. You don't die in a ditch. Get up. You have to get up." The cold was no longer just a feeling. It was a heavy weight pressing down on Leo's chest. His fingers were stiff inside his gloves, making it hard to grab the snow. He knew he had very little time. If the colt's heart rate slowed down any more, the animal would simply go to sleep and never wake up. "Get up!" Leo shouted again, his voice cracking against the wind. "You have to try." Leo began to dig frantically. He used his arms like shovels, throwing huge piles of snow to the side. He cleared the area around the colt's front legs first. The horse was pinned in a sitting position, its back legs trapped under a massive drift that had collapsed from the edge of the ravine. Leo moved to the back, digging until his lungs burned. The snow was packed tight like wet sand, making every handful a struggle. Finally, the horse's legs were free, but the animal didn't move. It lay there with its head resting on the white powder, its eyes glazed over. Leo realized the horse had given up. It was too tired to fight the freezing wind anymore. Leo did the only thing he could think of. He crawled into the small space he had cleared and pressed his entire body against the colt's neck. He tucked his hands under the horse's mane and leaned his head against its shivering shoulder. He wanted to share every bit of warmth he had left. "I am not leaving you," Leo whispered. "If you stay here, I stay here. And my dad will be really mad if I don't come home for dinner." He began to rub the horse's ears and neck with his palms. He remembered his grandfather saying that as long as the ears were warm, there was hope. He rubbed until his own arms ached. He talked to the horse about the green grass of spring and the way the sun felt on the high plains in July. He told the horse about the herd and how Midnight was probably looking for him right now. Suddenly, he felt a small twitch. The colt's ear flickered. Then, its ribcage expanded with a deep, shaky breath. The horse let out a low groan and tried to lift its head. "That's it!" Leo cheered, scrambling to his feet. "Come on! Stand up!" He grabbed the horse's mane and gave a firm pull. The colt struggled, its hooves slipping on the icy floor of the ravine. It fell back down once, then twice. On the third try, with a desperate lunge that sent snow flying everywhere, the horse found its footing. It stood on shaky, thin legs, leaning heavily against the side of the ravine. Now came the hardest part. They had to get back up the slope. Leo grabbed the yellow rope tied around his waist. He leaned back, putting all his weight into the rope, using the fence post at the top of the hill as an anchor. He whistled to the horse and started to climb. The colt followed, driven by some ancient instinct to stay with a leader. They moved inches at a time. Leo would pull the rope tight, and the horse would take a step. The wind at the top of the ravine was even stronger than before. It felt like a wall of ice. Leo couldn't see the house, but he could feel the rope. It was a straight line back to safety. He reached back and touched the colt's wet nose. "Follow the rope," Leo said. "Just follow the rope." The barn door creaked open, and a sliver of golden light spilled out into the white darkness. Leo's father was standing there with a heavy lantern, his face pale with fear. When he saw the small silhouette of his son leading a shivering colt out of the storm, he dropped the lantern into the hay and ran forward. He scooped Leo up in a massive hug, but Leo didn't let go of the rope. "I found him, Dad," Leo whispered, his voice almost gone. "He was buried." His father didn't say a word. He just guided them both into the warm, sweet-smelling air of the barn. They spent the next 4 hours working together. They rubbed the colt down with dry burlap sacks and wrapped it in 3 thick wool blankets. Leo's mother brought out buckets of warm water and a mash made of oats and molasses. By midnight, the colt was standing on its own, its dark eyes bright and alert. It let out a soft nicker as Leo brushed a hand over its velvet nose. The bond was sealed in that quiet, warm barn while the storm screamed outside. When the sun rose the next morning, the world was silent. The snow was piled high against the windows, sparkling like diamonds. Leo opened the top half of the barn door and looked out toward the range. In the distance, near the edge of the woods, the wild herd was waiting. The black stallion stood at the front, his head high, watching the ranch. Leo led the colt to the gate. He patted its neck one last time and pulled off the blankets. "Go on," he said softly. "Your family is waiting." The colt trotted out into the deep snow, its tail swishing. It stopped once, looked back at Leo for a long moment, and then let out a loud, happy neigh. It ran toward the herd, and together they disappeared into the pines. Leo knew he might never touch the horse again, but he also knew that every time he saw the wild herd, one of them would be looking back for him.